This cat was separated from his mother at the shelter, but what this young woman did next will break your heart. The smell of antiseptic mingled with the chorus of meows that echoed through the narrow hallways of Millfield Animal Shelter. It was a small, underfunded facility in a tree-lined American town where everyone knew their neighbors, and community events were marked on calendars months in advance. The shelter operated on donations and the goodwill of volunteers who cleaned cages, fed animals, and hoped for the miracle of adoption for each furry resident. In cage 27, a silver-gray kitten named Ashwin pressed his tiny paw through the cold metal bars, reaching desperately toward the adjacent enclosure. His fur was almost iridescent under the harsh fluorescent lights, and his eyes, always appearing wet with unspoken emotion, were fixed on the darker furred cat in the next cage, his mother. Their separation, a standard shelter practice meant to increase adoption chances, had created an invisible wound in the small creature's heart. The mother cat meowed incessantly, her cries a language only those who have loved and lost could truly understand. She paced her small space, occasionally pressing against the divider that kept her from her child. For Ashwin, the world had ended the moment they were pulled apart. He didn't create a fuss or cry out. Instead, he maintained a resilient silence, watching, waiting, hoping for someone to notice what should never have been broken. It was on a particularly cold Tuesday in October that Callista Jenkins pushed open the shelter's front door, her arms filled with donated blankets and clothes from the neighborhood collection drive. At 24, she balanced work at Millie's Corner Cafe with online classes, existing in that liminal space between youthful dreams and adult responsibilities. Her auburn hair was tied back in a practical ponytail, and dark circles shadowed her eyes from double shifts that week. "Just dropping these off," she called to no one in particular, setting the bundle on a worn reception desk. The familiar scent of the shelter, disinfectant with undertones of animal life, didn't bother her. She'd made similar deliveries before. Usually she'd leave quickly, mindful of her landlady Mrs. Holden's warnings about bringing home ideas about pets. Today, however, something made her pause. Perhaps it was the particular quality of silence that drew her down the row of cages. Most animals reacted to visitors, barking, meowing, or pawing at their enclosures, but as she passed cage 27, she noticed a stillness. The small grey kitten wasn't making noise or seeking attention. He was simply reaching, with focused determination, toward the next cage. Callista knelt, her knees cracking against the hard floor. "Hey there, little one," she whispered. Ashwin turned his head slowly, and their eyes met. The look in those feline eyes wasn't merely asking for food or play or even freedom. It was deeper, more primal. "Don't leave me alone too." Something in that gaze reached past Callista's careful boundaries and wrapped around her heart. She stood quickly, almost stumbling backward. "I can't," she murmured to herself. "I really can't." Her rental agreement explicitly forbade pets. Mrs. Holden, a widow in her 70s with thinning white hair and a stern demeanor, had made it abundantly clear during the lease signing, no animals, not even goldfish. Animals mean mess, noise, and damage. The rent was already stretching Callista's cafe wages thin, and finding affordable housing in Millfield was nearly impossible since the tech company opened offices on the edge of town. "Beautiful, isn't he?" Callista turned to find Marjorie, one of the long-time shelter volunteers, standing beside her. The older woman's hands were chapped from constant washing, but her smile was warm. "They were brought in together last week," Marjorie continued. "Standard procedure is to separate them. Kittens get adopted faster on their own, and adult cats..." She trailed off, leaving the grim reality unspoken. Adult cats often didn't get adopted at all. "They seem to be reaching for each other," Callista observed, watching as the mother cat pressed against the divider, her meows growing more insistent. "They do that," Marjorie said with a sad smile. "It's hard, but it's how the system works. Will you be taking any home today?" Callista shook her head quickly. "I can't. My landlady would evict me." She stepped away from the cage, but couldn't help looking back once more. The kitten had turned his attention back to his mother, that single paw still extended through the bars. "Well, the donations are appreciated," Marjorie said. "Winter's coming, and we never have enough blankets." Callista nodded and headed for the exit, pushing the door open into the crisp autumn air. The wind rustled through maple trees that lined Main Street, sending red and gold leaves dancing across the sidewalk. She pulled her jacket tighter and walked toward the bus stop, trying to shake the image of that tiny paw reaching across an impossible divide. That night, As she heated leftover soup in her small apartment, Callista found herself thinking about the grey kitten. She'd seen many animals at the shelter before. Why had this one affected her so deeply? She washed her dishes, straightened the stack of textbooks on her coffee table, and prepared for bed. But the image of those pleading eyes followed her into her dreams. In the quiet darkness of her bedroom, as the old building creaked and settled, Callista made a promise to herself she would go back, just to check, just to see if someone had adopted the kitten. It was curiosity, nothing more. But deep down, as the moon cast shadows across her room, she knew it was something far more powerful than curiosity that would draw her back to cage 27. And that realization, hovering on the edge of her consciousness, both thrilled and terrified her. 3 days passed before Callista could return to the shelter. 3 days of serving coffee and apple pie to regulars at Millie's, of rushing between tables during the lunch rush, of collapsing into bed with aching feet and the scent of coffee grounds clinging to her hair. 3 days of wondering about a small grey kitten with silver fur. When she finally pushed open the shelter door again, she told herself it was merely to drop off another bag of donations. This time, dog treats that a customer had left at the cafe. The familiar antiseptic smell greeted her, along with the cacophony of animal sounds that echoed through the narrow corridor. Back so soon? Marjorie looked up from the reception desk, her reading glasses perched on the end of her nose. Just dropping these off, Callista said, placing the bag on the counter. She hesitated, then added, I thought I might take another look around. Marjorie smiled knowingly. Cage 27? Callista felt heat rise to her cheeks. Is he still here? For now, we've had a few inquiries. The thought of someone else adopting the kitten sent an unexpected pang through Callista's chest. She nodded politely and made her way down the row of cages, trying to appear casual, as though she was simply browsing. When she reached cage 27, her heart skipped. Ashwin was curled in the corner, a small ball of silver-grey fur. He looked even smaller than she remembered. At the sound of her footsteps, his head lifted, eyes blinking slowly in the fluorescent light. For a moment he just stared. Then, in a movement that seemed to contain all the hope in the world, he stood and walked to the cage door. When Callista knelt and placed her fingers against the bars, something extraordinary happened. Ashwin began to purr. The sound, barely audible at first, grew stronger as he pressed his small body against the cage door. He hasn't done that since he arrived, Marjorie said, appearing beside Callista. Hasn't made a sound for anyone. Can I hold him? The question escaped before Callista could stop it. Marjorie unlocked the cage and carefully lifted Ashwin, placing him in Callista's arms. The kitten's body was warm and surprisingly light, his heart beating rapidly against her palm. He looked up at her with those same imploring eyes, and the purring intensified, vibrating through her chest. He's chosen you, Marjorie said softly. What about his mother? Callista asked, glancing at the adjacent cage where the darker cat watched them intently. Marjorie's expression sobered. Adult cats are harder to place. We'll keep trying, but... Again, she left the sentence unfinished, the implication hanging heavily between them. Callista stroked Ashwin's soft fur, feeling the delicate bones beneath. Something inside her was shifting, rearranging priorities and possibilities. How much is the adoption fee? $50. It covers initial vaccinations and a voucher for neutering when he's old enough. It was $50 she couldn't really spare. Her budget was stretched thin between rent, utilities, and textbooks. Yet, as Ashwin nestled against her, trusting and vulnerable, financial calculations seemed suddenly less important. I'll take him, she said, the words emerging with surprising firmness. Marjorie's eyebrows rose. What about your landlady? I'll figure something out. Callista wasn't sure how, but the determination in her voice surprised even herself. As Marjorie prepared the paperwork, Callista carried Ashwin to say goodbye to his mother. The adult cat meowed plaintively, reaching a paw toward her kitten. Ashwin responded with a soft mew, the first vocalization Callista had heard from him. The sound broke something inside her. I'm so sorry, she whispered to the mother cat. I wish I could take you both. The adoption process was quick, perhaps too quick. Before she fully grasped the magnitude of her decision, Callista was carrying a cardboard carrier containing Ashwin out to the bus stop. She'd also purchased a small bag of kitten food, a litter box and litter, straining her budget even further. The bus ride home was a blur of conflicting emotions. Joy at the warm weight of the carrier on her lap, anxiety about Mrs. Halden, worry about the mother cat left behind. Ashwin remained quiet throughout the journey, occasionally pressing a paw against the air holes of the carrier, as if to remind Callista he was there. When they reached her apartment building, Callista paused at the entrance, scanning the windows for signs of Mrs. Holden. The landlady's unit was on the first floor, and she had an uncanny ability to materialize in the hallway whenever residents were breaking rules. Seeing no movement, Callista hurried inside and up the stairs to her second-floor apartment. Once safely inside, she set down the carrier and opened the door. Ashwin emerged cautiously, silver fur catching the afternoon light streaming through the windows. He took a few tentative steps, sniffing the unfamiliar territory, before looking back at Callista, as if seeking reassurance. "Welcome home," she said, kneeling beside him. "It's not much, but it's ours now." She spent the remainder of the afternoon watching Ashwin explore his new environment. He investigated every corner, sniffed at the worn couch, and batted at dust motes dancing in the sunlight. By evening, he seemed to have mapped his territory, returning to Callista's side as she prepared a simple dinner of pasta and jarred sauce. It was only when night fell that the consequences of separation became apparent. As darkness enveloped the apartment, Ashwin dragged a small throw blanket from the couch to the door. He arranged it in a makeshift nest and curled up, emitting soft, mournful mews that pierced Callista's heart. He was looking for his mother. Callista sat beside him, stroking his fur, but the kitten continued to cry, the sounds growing more distressed as the night deepened. She tried enticing him with food, with toys fashioned from twisted paper, with gentle words, but nothing consoled him. His loss was too profound, too fresh. Around midnight, exhausted and heartsick, Callista lifted Ashwin and the blanket, carrying them to her bed. She created a small nest beside her pillow, and the kitten finally settled, his body pressed against her neck, his breath warm against her skin. The crying subsided, replaced by the gentle rhythm of sleep, but Callista remained awake, staring at the ceiling. What had she done? She'd saved one life, but left another behind. She'd broken her lease agreement and risked her housing security. She'd spent money she couldn't afford on a responsibility she wasn't sure she could handle. Yet as Ashwin's small body twitched in dreams beside her, Callista couldn't bring herself to regret her decision. Something about this small creature had called to her, had recognized something in her that perhaps she hadn't fully acknowledged in herself, a capacity for compassion that transcended practical concerns. As sleep finally claimed her, one thought crystallized with perfect clarity. This was only the beginning of their story. The sharp rap on Callista's door came at precisely 7:15 the next morning. 3 quick knocks, authoritative, demanding attention. Ashwin, who had been exploring the kitchen counter, darted under the couch, a streak of silver in the morning light. Callista's heart sank. She knew that knock. Straightening her rumpled t-shirt, she took a deep breath and opened the door. Mrs. Holden stood in the hallway, arms crossed over her cardigan. At 72, she maintained the ramrod posture of someone who had spent decades enforcing rules. Her white hair was arranged in tight curls, and her lips were compressed into a thin line of disapproval. "Good morning, Mrs. Holden," Callista said, trying to sound casual while blocking the view into her apartment. "Is everything all right?" "Mrs. Finley in 3B saw you yesterday," the landlady said without preamble. "She said you were carrying an animal carrier." Callista felt heat rise to her face. Mrs. Finley, a retired schoolteacher with keen eyes and a tendency to report all neighborhood happenings, had been watering plants on her balcony when Callista returned with Ashwin. "I can explain," Callista began, but Mrs. Holden raised a hand. "The lease is very clear, Miss Jenkins. No pets, no exceptions." Behind Callista, a small crash sounded as Ashwin knocked something off the kitchen counter. Mrs. Holden's eyebrows shot up, and she leaned to peer around Callista's shoulder. "I see," she said coolly. "Well, you have 24 hours to remove the animal or find new accommodations." Panic bloomed in Callista's chest. "Please, Mrs. Holden, he's just a kitten. He doesn't make noise, and I'll keep everything clean. I promise you won't even know he's here." The older woman's expression remained unmoved. "Rules exist for a reason, Miss Jenkins. Animals damage property. They cause disturbances. They leave odors. I'll pay an extra deposit," Callista offered desperately, "and I could help around the building, with maintenance or cleaning the common areas." It was a rash offer, one that would further strain her already limited time, but the thought of returning Ashwin to the shelter, or worse, being evicted, was unbearable. Mrs. Holden hesitated, her stern expression flickering. For a moment, Callista glimpsed something beneath the landlady's rigid exterior, a flash of uncertainty, perhaps even loneliness. The older woman lived alone, rarely receiving visitors, except when collecting rent or addressing complaints. "I don't need help," Mrs. Holden said, but her tone had softened marginally. "Everyone needs help sometimes," Callista responded quietly. "I could check on you during winter storms, or pick up groceries when the weather's bad. And I know you mentioned the hallway carpet needs cleaning." Mrs. Holden studied her for a long moment. The silence stretched between them, broken only by the soft padding of Ashwin's paws as he cautiously emerged from under the couch. $300 additional security deposit, the landlady finally said, "and you'll vacuum the common areas weekly. The animal stays in your apartment at all times." Relief washed over Callista. "Thank you, Mrs. Holden. Thank you so much. I'll get you the deposit by the end of the week." She'd have to pick up extra shifts at the cafe and postpone buying the textbook for her psychology class, but it was worth it. Mrs. Holden nodded curtly. "See that you do." Her gaze dropped to Ashwin, who had approached the door with curious caution. For an instant, so brief Callista thought she might have imagined it, the older woman's expression softened. Then she turned and walked briskly down the hallway, her sensible shoes clicking against the linoleum. Callista closed the door and slid down against it, exhaling a shaky breath. Ashwin padded over and climbed into her lap, purring as though to congratulate her on their narrow escape. "That was close, buddy," she whispered, stroking his soft fur. "We're going to have to be very careful from now on." The following weeks established a new rhythm to Callista's life. She rose earlier to feed Ashwin and clean his litter box before rushing to morning classes or work shifts. Her evenings now included playtime with the kitten, who grew more energetic as he adjusted to his new home. The extra shifts at the cafe left her exhausted, her hands smelling perpetually of coffee and her feet aching from hours of standing. But the sight of Ashwin waiting at the door when she returned made the fatigue bearable. What didn't change was the nightly ritual. As darkness fell, Ashwin would drag his blanket, now designated as his special comfort item, to the door and meow softly, searching for his mother. The cries grew less frequent as days passed, but they never fully ceased, a testament to a bond broken too soon. October deepened into November, bringing the first frost and transforming Millfield into a canvas of crimson and gold. The cafe filled with customers seeking warmth and comfort, ordering pumpkin spice lattes and cinnamon rolls that Callista served with increasingly practiced efficiency. Regular customers noticed the change in her, a softening around the eyes, a tendency to share small stories about her new companion when they asked about her day. "You should bring pictures," suggested Eleanor Winters, an 80-year-old widow who came every morning for Earl Grey tea and toast. Nothing brightens a cold day like kitten photos. Callista began carrying her phone, showing pictures of Ashwin to anyone who expressed interest. The small grey kitten became something of a local celebrity among the cafe regulars, who asked for updates and occasionally brought small toys or treats for him. It was Eleanor who first asked the question that had been haunting Callista's thoughts. What about his mother? Is she still at the shelter? The query, innocent and concerned, pierced Callista's carefully constructed contentment. She had been avoiding thinking about the mother cat, focusing instead on Ashwin's integration into her life. But in quiet moments, when the kitten cried at night or stared longingly at the door, the guilt resurfaced. "I don't know," Callista admitted. "I haven't checked." Eleanor's faded blue eyes held no judgment, only gentle understanding. "Perhaps you should." That afternoon, during her break, Callista called the shelter. Marjorie answered, her voice crackling through the phone's speaker. "The mother cat?" "Yes, she's still here," the volunteer confirmed. "We've had some interest, but no commitments yet." Relief flooded Callista, followed immediately by concern. "How is she doing?" A pause. "She's eating, but not thriving. Keeps looking for her kitten. We're running out of space, though. If she doesn't get adopted soon." The implication hung heavily in the silence. Overcrowded shelters often had to make difficult decisions. "How soon?" Callista asked, her voice tight. "End of the month, maybe. We are trying to arrange transfers to other facilities, but everyone's full this time of year." After hanging up, Callista sat on a stack of empty coffee bean sacks behind the cafe, watching her breath form clouds in the cold air. The mother cat had less than 2 weeks. 2 weeks before she might be euthanized or, best case, shipped to a shelter in another state, permanently separated from her kitten. The thought was unbearable, yet the alternative seemed impossible. Callista could barely manage one cat with her current schedule and budget. Taking in a second would mean more expenses, more responsibility, potentially even conflict with Mrs. Holden, despite their fragile truce. That evening, as she watched Ashwin playing with a crumpled paper ball, batting it across the wooden floor with surprising dexterity, Callista found herself at a crossroads. The kitten had brought unexpected joy into her life. His playful antics, his soft purr when she stroked his fur, the way he curled against her neck as she studied late into the night. But his happiness wasn't complete. Something was missing, and they both knew it. As Ashwin dragged his blanket to the door for his nightly vigil, Callista made a decision. She couldn't save every animal in need. The world was full of creatures requiring rescue and care. But perhaps, just perhaps, she could save this one specific family, already bonded to her heart in ways she hadn't anticipated. It wouldn't be easy. It might even be foolish. But as Ashwin looked up at her with those perpetually damp eyes, she knew what she had to do. "We're going to get your mom," she whispered, kneeling beside him. "Somehow we'll make it work." Ashwin's response was a soft purr, as though he understood perfectly the promise being made in the quiet of their small apartment, with winter pressing against the windows and uncertainty hovering on the horizon. November in Millfield brought the first significant snowfall, transforming the town into a postcard-perfect scene. Main Street glittered under strings of early holiday lights, and shop windows displayed autumn harvests, transitioning to winter celebrations. For tourists passing through, it was charming. For residents like Callista, it meant bitter cold, seeping through poorly insulated walls and treacherous sidewalks on the walk to work. At the shelter, the dropping temperatures created a crisis. The aging heating system struggled to keep the concrete building warm, leaving animals shivering in their cages. Marjorie's worried voice over the phone explained the situation to Callista during her lunch break at the cafe. "We're desperate for donations," the volunteer said. "Blankets, heating pads, anything to keep them warm until the furnace can be repaired." Callista glanced around the busy cafe, where customers in heavy coats sipped steaming beverages. "I'll see what I can do," she promised. After her shift, she approached Frank Miller, the cafe owner, a gruff man in his 60s with a hidden sentimental streak. "The animal shelter needs help," she explained. "Their heating system is failing, and the animals are suffering in this cold." Frank scratched his grey beard thoughtfully. "Not sure what a coffee shop can do about broken furnaces. We could set up a donation box," Callista suggested. "Or maybe offer a discount to customers who bring in blankets or supplies." To her surprise, Frank didn't dismiss the idea. "Martha's always had a soft spot for animals," he said, referring to his wife of 40 years. "Tell you what, bring in a donation box tomorrow. We'll give a free coffee to anyone who contributes." The response exceeded Callista's expectations. Word spread quickly through Millfield's tight-knit community. By the end of the week, the storage room behind the cafe was filled with donated blankets, pet beds, heating pads, and even a space heater. Customers shared stories of their own rescued pets as they dropped items in the box, creating a sense of shared purpose that warmed the cafe more effectively than the radiators. Eleanor Winters brought in a carefully folded quilt that she'd made years ago. "My cat Josephine used to sleep on this," she explained, her gnarled hands smoothing the fabric. "She's been gone 5 years now, but she'd want another animal to have it." Pastor Williams from the Methodist Church announced the shelter's needs during Sunday service, resulting in a carload of donations from parishioners. The elementary school organized a blanket drive, with children decorating collection boxes with crayon drawings of cats and dogs. Millfield was responding, not just with donations but with stories and connections. Each blanket or pet bed came with a history, a beloved pet now gone, a child's outgrown baby blanket, a spare heating pad no longer needed. The shelter's plight had touched something fundamental in the community, reminding people of shared vulnerabilities and the simple power of collective action. Callista found herself at the center of this unexpected movement, coordinating pickups and deliveries, thanking donors, and providing updates on the shelter's needs. The additional responsibility should have been overwhelming, given her already stretched schedule, but instead it energized her. For the first time since moving to Millfield 2 years earlier, she felt truly connected to the town and its people. On a particularly bitter Saturday morning, Callista arrived at the shelter with Frank's pickup truck filled with donations. The parking lot was slick with ice, and her breath formed thick clouds in the frigid air. Inside, the situation was dire. Volunteers moved between cages, tucking blankets around shivering animals, while Marjorie argued with a repairman whose expression suggested the news wasn't good. "The whole system needs replacement," the man was saying as Callista approached. "Patch job won't hold through winter. "We don't have that kind of money," Marjorie replied, her voice tight with frustration. "The county budget for the shelter barely covers food and basic medical care." Callista began unloading the donations, distributing blankets and setting up space heaters where outlets allowed. The animals responded with visible relief, burrowing into the soft fabrics or pressing against the warm air. As she worked her way down the rows of cages, her heart quickened. She was approaching the area where the mother cat was housed. The dark-furred cat was curled tightly in the corner of her cage, her body a compact ball against the cold. Unlike the other animals who meowed eagerly at the sight of blankets, she remained motionless, her eyes fixed on some distant point. Only when Callista knelt before the cage did she stir, lifting her head with what seemed like tremendous effort. "Hi there," Callista said softly. "Remember me? I have your son." At the sound of her voice, something flickered in the cat's gaze. Recognition, perhaps, or simply response to human contact after days of withdrawal. She rose and approached the cage door, moving with deliberate slowness. When Callista extended her fingers through the bars, the cat sniffed them, then pressed her head against Callista's hand. The gesture broke Callista's heart. This wasn't just an animal seeking warmth or food. It was a mother who had lost her child, responding to the last person who had connected them. Callista remained there, stroking the cat's fur, until Marjorie approached. "She's declined since you took the kitten," the volunteer said quietly. "Barely eating, not interacting with staff. We've tried everything, special foods, toys, even moving her cage to sunnier spots, but nothing helps." "Has there been any interest in adopting her?" Callista asked, though she already knew the answer. Marjorie shook her head. "Everyone wants kittens, especially around the holidays, adult cats." She sighed, her breath visible in the cold air. "We have interest in a transfer from a no-kill shelter in the next county, but they're at capacity until after New Year's. And with our heating situation, the implication hung between them, heavy as the snow clouds gathering outside. Without adequate heat, the shelter couldn't keep animals indefinitely. Difficult decisions would need to be made. "When?" Callista asked, her voice barely audible. "Board meeting is Tuesday. They'll decide then which animals to transfer and which—" Marjorie couldn't finish the sentence. Tuesday, 3 days away. The timeline crystallized Callista's nebulous intentions into sharp focus. If she was going to act, it had to be now, before bureaucracy and circumstance made decisions that couldn't be undone. "I want to adopt her," she said, the words emerging with surprising firmness. Marjorie's eyebrows rose. "Are you sure? 2 cats is a big commitment, especially when you were hesitant about even one." "I'm sure." The certainty in Callista's voice surprised even herself. "What's her name, by the way? I realized I never asked." "Leela," Marjorie said. "It means play in Sanskrit, though she hasn't lived up to it lately." "Leela," Callista repeated, trying the name. It seemed to fit the dignified, dark cat, despite her current subdued state. Ashwin and Leela together again. The adoption process was even quicker this time, perhaps because of the shelter's situation, or perhaps because Marjorie sensed the rightness of the reunion. By early afternoon, Callista was loading a carrier containing Leela into Frank's borrowed truck, along with a few remaining donations. The drive home was tense. Snow had begun falling, thick flakes that quickly accumulated on the windshield faster than the wipers could clear them. Visibility diminished to a few yards ahead, and the truck's tires occasionally lost traction on the increasingly slick roads. From the carrier secured on the passenger seat came soft, questioning meows, as though Leela sensed both the danger and the possibility that lay ahead. "Almost there," Callista reassured her, navigating slowly through the whitening streets. "Almost home." The word home caught in her throat. What was she doing? Her apartment was barely large enough for her and Ashwin. Her budget was already stretched to breaking. Miss Halden had reluctantly accepted 1 cat. How would she react to a second? And what if the animals didn't get along after their separation? Doubts swirled like the snowflakes around the truck, but beneath them lay a bedrock of certainty. This was right. Whatever challenges arose, whatever sacrifices were required, reuniting mother and child was the only possible choice. Some bonds should not be broken, even by well-intentioned systems or practical concerns. As she pulled up to her apartment building, another worry surfaced. Mrs. Holden's ground-floor window glowed with lamplight, meaning the landlady was home and likely to notice Callista struggling through the snow with a second carrier. There would be questions, confrontations, possibly even threats of eviction. For a moment, Callista sat in the idling truck, watching snowflakes accumulate on the windshield. Then, with a deep breath, she turned off the engine. Whatever came next, She would face it, for Ashwin, for Leela, and for herself. The snow fell in thick, silent curtains as Callista lifted Leela's carrier from the truck. Flakes clung to her eyelashes and melted against her cheeks, mingling with tears she hadn't realized were falling. The weight of her decision pressed against her chest, not with regret, but with the solemn responsibility of what she was undertaking. She paused at the building's entrance, glancing toward Mrs. Halden's illuminated window. No movement was visible behind the curtains, but Callista knew better than to assume safety. The landlady had an uncanny ability to materialize in hallways precisely when rules were being broken. Taking a deep breath, Callista pushed through the door and headed for the stairs, moving as quickly and quietly as possible with the awkward carrier. Each creak of the old wooden steps seemed magnified in the hushed building, and Leela's occasional meows echoed against the walls. By the time she reached her apartment door, Callista's heart was pounding, and not just from the exertion. Inside, Ashwin was waiting. The kitten had grown noticeably in the weeks since his adoption, his once gaunt frame filling out with regular meals and his silver fur developing a healthy sheen. He trotted to the door, greeting Callista with his now customary purr before noticing the carrier. His ears perked forward, and he approached cautiously, sniffing the air. Callista set the carrier down gently on the living room floor. "I have a surprise for you," she whispered, her fingers trembling slightly as she unlatched the door. For a moment, nothing happened. Leela remained inside, perhaps disoriented by the journey or wary of the unfamiliar surroundings. Then slowly the dark-furred cat emerged, blinking in the apartment's warm light. Mother and son faced each other across 2 feet of worn carpet. Ashwin froze, his small body tense with what might have been uncertainty or disbelief. Leela's tail twitched once, twice, her amber eyes fixed on the silver kitten. The silence stretched, broken only by the soft pattering of snow against the windows. Callista held her breath, suddenly terrified that she had waited too long, that the separation had erased the bond between them, that Leela might reject her own offspring, that her well-intentioned intervention had come too late. Then Ashwin moved. With a sound that was half meow, half purr, he crossed the distance between them and pressed his head against his mother's chest. Leela responded immediately, curling her body around him, licking his ears with firm maternal strokes. The purring that erupted from both cats filled the small apartment, vibrating with such intensity that Callista could feel it in her bones. She sank onto the couch, overwhelmed by the emotion of the moment. This was right. Whatever challenges lay ahead, financial strain, Mrs. Holden's disapproval, the logistics of caring for 2 animals in a small space, this reunion justified them all. Some things were simply meant to be, defying practical concerns and rational objections. The reunion continued through the evening, with Ashwin and Leela engaging in a complex dance of reacquaintance. They groomed each other, explored the apartment together, and eventually settled on Ashwin's blanket by the door, their bodies intertwined in perfect contentment. The nightly crying ritual that had punctuated Callista's evening since the adoption was replaced by peaceful silence, broken only by synchronized purring. Callista watched them from the kitchen table, where she was attempting to study for an upcoming psychology exam. The textbook lay open before her, but her attention kept drifting to the 2 cats curled together in perfect harmony. Their reunion represented something profound, a healing, a restoration of natural order that transcended the artificial separations imposed by human systems. As the evening deepened, snow continued to fall, muffling the sounds of the town and creating a cocoon of quiet around the apartment. Callista made a simple dinner of pasta and canned sauce, sharing a few small pieces of chicken with both cats. They accepted the offering with dignified gratitude, Leela watching protectively as Ashwin ate his portion first. When Callista finally prepared for bed, exhausted from the emotional day, she wondered how the sleeping arrangements would work. Ashwin had been sharing her bed, curled against her neck or nestled in the curve of her knees. Would Leela join them? Would the mother cat prefer solitude after so long in a cage? The question answered itself. As Callista slipped under the covers, both cats padded into the bedroom, jumping onto the bed with synchronized grace. They settled together near her feet, Leela's dark fur contrasting with Ashwin's silver coat, their bodies forming a perfect yin and yang of contentment. For the first time since bringing Ashwin home, Callista slept through the night without being awakened by plaintive meows. The apartment was silent, except for the gentle rhythm of purring and the occasional soft sighs of dreams. Morning arrived with piercing clarity, sunlight reflecting off fresh snow and streaming through Callista's windows. She woke to find both cats still on the bed, watching her with matching amber eyes. "Good morning, family," she murmured, the word feeling right on her tongue. The peaceful moment shattered with 3 sharp knocks on her door. The distinctive rhythm announced Mrs. Holden before Callista even rose from bed. Both cats darted under the bed, sensing the tension that instantly filled the apartment. Callista pulled on a robe and ran her fingers through sleep-tousled hair, mentally rehearsing explanations and defenses. Taking a deep breath, she opened the door. Mrs. Holden stood in the hallway, arms crossed, her face set in its familiar lines of disapproval. "Miss Jenkins," she said coolly, "I believe we need to discuss the terms of our agreement." "Mrs. Holden, I can explain—" "You were seen yesterday," the landlady interrupted, "bringing in a second carrier. After our explicit agreement about one animal only." Callista's heart sank. There was no point in denial. The evidence would soon make itself known. "It's his mother," she said simply. They were separated at the shelter, and she was going to be— She couldn't bring herself to finish the sentence. Mrs. Holden's expression remained impassive. The terms were clear. 1 cat, additional deposit, weekly cleaning of common areas. "I'll pay another deposit," Callista offered quickly. "And I can increase the cleaning to twice weekly. Please, Mrs. Holden, I couldn't leave her there. Not when Ashwin missed her so much." Something flickered across the older woman's face, a brief softening around the eyes, quickly masked. "This building has rules, Miss Jenkins. Rules that apply to everyone. If I make an exception for you—" "Sometimes exceptions are necessary," Callista said quietly. "Sometimes the rules don't account for everything that matters." From behind her, a soft thump announced the cat's emergence from under the bed. Ashwin approached the door first, his silver coat gleaming in the morning light. He was followed closely by Leela, her movements more cautious but equally deliberate. Mrs. Holden looked down at the pair, her stern expression wavering. Ashwin, displaying a boldness that surprised Callista, walked directly to the landlady and rubbed against her ankles, leaving silver hairs on her dark stockings. "He's gotten bigger," Mrs. Holden observed, her voice softer than Callista had ever heard it. "Yes, he's thriving now." Callista hesitated, then added, "Even more so now that his mother is here. They were separated too soon." Mrs. Holden's gaze shifted to Leela, who maintained a dignified distance but watched the interaction with intelligent eyes. For a long moment, the landlady was silent, and Callista held her breath, aware that her future hung in the balance of this unexpected standoff. Finally, Mrs. Holden sighed. "Another $300 deposit," she said, "and you'll need to keep the hallway vacuumed twice weekly. Any complaints from neighbors about noise or odors, and we'll revisit this discussion." Relief flooded through Callista. "Thank you, Mrs. Holden, thank you so much." The older woman nodded curtly, but as she turned to leave, she paused. "My Harold and I had cats, you know, before he passed. 3 of them. Orange tabbies." The admission seemed to cost her something, revealing a vulnerability beneath her stern exterior. "I didn't know," Callista said softly. "Yes, well." Mrs. Holden straightened, resuming her usual demeanor. "The deposit is due by the end of the week, Miss Jenkins." As the landlady's footsteps receded down the hallway, Callista closed the door and leaned against it, exhaling a shaky breath. "That was close," she murmured to the cats who had watched the entire exchange with feline intensity. Another obstacle overcome, but the challenges were far from over. An additional $300 meant more shifts at the cafe, less time for studying, a tighter budget for essentials. The path ahead looked daunting, lined with sacrifices and difficult choices. Yet as she watched Ashwin and Leela settle together on the windowsill, bathed in morning sunlight, Callista couldn't summon regret. Some burdens were worth carrying, some struggles worth enduring, when the outcome was as right as this reunion. The snow outside had transformed Millfield into a winter wonderland, branches laden with white, streets hushed beneath blankets of pristine coverage. It was beautiful, but treacherous, hiding ice beneath innocent-looking drifts, requiring careful navigation and constant vigilance. Rather like life itself, Callista thought as she prepared for her day. Beautiful, challenging, unpredictable, and infinitely worth the journey, despite the obstacles along the way. December arrived with a vengeance, bringing Arctic winds that howled through Millfield streets and temperatures that plunged well below freezing. The picturesque snow of November transformed into treacherous ice, turning sidewalks into hazardous obstacle courses and roads into slippery challenges. For the elderly residents of Millfield, winter imposed a kind of house arrest, confining them to their homes unless absolute necessity drove them out. For Callista, the harsh weather meant bundling up in layers for pre-dawn walks to the cafe, her breath forming thick clouds in the frigid air, and her fingers numbing despite woolen gloves. The additional shifts she'd taken to cover the new security deposit left her perpetually exhausted, dark circles forming beneath her eyes and a persistent cough developing from the constant transition between freezing outdoors and overheated interiors. At home, Ashwin and Leela had settled into a comfortable routine. The reunion had transformed both cats. Ashwin's nighttime crying ceased completely, replaced by peaceful sleep curled against his mother's dark fur, while Leela regained the weight and vitality she had lost at the shelter. They greeted Callista with synchronous purring when she returned from work or classes, creating a warmth that no thermostat could replicate. But the financial strain was becoming unbearable. Heating bills soared with the plummeting temperatures, and the old building's poor insulation meant Callista often kept the oven door open after cooking, desperate for any additional warmth. The double security deposit had depleted her meager savings, leaving nothing for emergencies. Even basic groceries became luxuries, with meals often reduced to ramen noodles or peanut butter sandwiches. "So you're working too hard," Eleanor observed one morning at the cafe, her aged eyes sharp with concern as Callista stifled another cough while refilling her teacup. "You look exhausted, dear." "I'm fine," Callista insisted, though her voice betrayed her with its hoarseness. "Just a winter cold." Eleanor wasn't convinced. "Is it the cats? Are they causing trouble?" "No, they're wonderful." A genuine smile brightened Callista's tired face. "They're so happy together. Ashwin doesn't cry at night anymore, and Leela is like a different cat from the sad creature at the shelter." "But?" Eleanor prompted gently. Callista hesitated, reluctant to burden the elderly woman with her problems. But something about Eleanor's weathered face, with its map of wrinkles earned through decades of living, invited confidence. "It's expensive," she admitted quietly. 2 security deposits, double the food and litter, and the heating bills this month. I'm barely making rent." Eleanor nodded thoughtfully, stirring her tea with deliberate motions. "When Harold and I were first married," she said, "we lived in a tiny apartment above the hardware store. So cold in winter, we could see our breath indoors. We couldn't afford coal for the stove, so we took turns sitting with blankets draped over our shoulders, reading aloud to each other." She paused, her gaze distant with memory. "It was one of the happiest times of my life, not because of the hardship, but because we faced it together. Sometimes the most difficult circumstances reveal what truly matters." Callista absorbed this wisdom, recognizing its truth. Despite the financial strain, despite the physical exhaustion, the sight of Ashwin and Leela together brought a joy that no amount of money could purchase. "Speaking of togetherness," Eleanor continued, her tone lightening, "the church is hosting a winter fundraiser this weekend. Warm meals, holiday crafts, that sort of thing. The proceeds go to community needs, heating assistance, food pantry, and so on." She paused meaningfully. "They're looking for volunteers to help serve food." "I'm not much of a church goer," Callista said hesitantly. Eleanor waved away the concern. "Neither am I, dear. Haven't set foot in that building since Harold's funeral. But Pastor Williams doesn't care about attendance records, only about helping where help is needed. The opportunity to be on the receiving end of community support, rather than always stretching herself to provide it, was tempting." "I could check my schedule," Callista said. "I have a morning shift on Saturday, but I might be free in the afternoon." "Wonderful. I'll tell Martha Wilson you're interested. She's organizing the volunteer roster." Eleanor patted Callista's hand. "And do try to rest when you can. Those cats need you healthy." The conversation lingered in Callista's mind as she continued her shift, moving between tables with mechanical efficiency while her thoughts drifted. Eleanor's story about her early marriage had struck a chord. The recognition that happiness and material comfort weren't necessarily linked, that struggle shared could become its own form of richness. But reality intruded harshly that evening, when Callista returned home to find the apartment frigid. The ancient heating system had failed again, leaving the room so cold she could see her breath, just as Eleanor had described. Ashwin and Leela had burrowed together beneath the comforter on her bed, creating a small island of warmth in the Arctic apartment. "I'm sorry, guys," Callista said, her voice cracking with exhaustion as she joined them under the covers, still wearing her coat and boots. "I'll call maintenance in the morning." She fell asleep, fully clothed, with cats pressed against her for warmth, and woke to a pounding headache and fever. The cough had worsened overnight, developing a concerning rattle deep in her chest. Standing made the room spin, and even the thought of food turned her stomach. For the first time since starting at the cafe 2 years earlier, Callista called in sick. Frank's gruff voice softened when he heard her rasping explanation. "Stay home," he ordered. "We'll manage. Get some rest and fluids." Rest was impossible with the apartment so cold. Maintenance responded to her call with the news that parts for the heating system would take days to arrive. In the meantime, they provided a small space heater that barely warmed the bedroom, leaving the rest of the apartment uninhabitable. Confined to bed with worsening fever, Callista drifted in and out of consciousness, aware in her lucid moments of Ashwin and Leela maintaining a concerned vigil. They took turns leaving only to use the litter box or drink water, always returning quickly to the nest of blankets where Callista shivered despite the fever burning through her. By evening she was struggling to breathe, each inhalation catching painfully in her chest. Her phone buzzed with a text from Eleanor. "Are you all right, dear? Frank mentioned you were ill." With trembling fingers, Callista managed a brief reply. "Sick, no heat, we'll be okay." She dropped the phone, too exhausted to hold it, and fell back into fitful sleep. Dreams mixed with reality. She was back at the shelter, reaching through cold bars for something just beyond her grasp. She was a child again, watching her mother pack a suitcase, promising to return but never doing so. She was lost in snow that grew deeper with each step, while distant voices called her name. A firm knocking penetrated the fever dreams. Callista struggled to orient herself, uncertain whether the sound was real or imagined. Ashwin and Leela had both raised their heads, ears pricked toward the apartment door, confirming that the knocking existed outside her fevered imagination. "Coming," she tried to call, but her voice emerged as a hoarse whisper. Getting out of bed required monumental effort, each movement sending waves of dizziness and nausea through her. She stumbled to the door, bracing against the wall for support, and pulled it open. Pastor Williams stood in the hallway, his tall frame bundled in a heavy coat, a knitted scarf wrapped around his neck. Beside him was Eleanor, her small figure nearly lost inside a down parka. Both carried bags, grocery sacks, a thermos, what looked like extra blankets. "Oh my!" Eleanor exclaimed, taking in Callista's disheveled appearance and flushed face. "You're much worse than I thought." "We got your text," Pastor Williams explained, his deep voice gentle with concern. "Eleanor was worried, so we thought we'd check on you." "I'm okay," Callista managed, though the room was spinning alarmingly around her. "Just a cold." "That's not a cold, dear. That's influenza at best, pneumonia at worst." Eleanor pushed past her into the apartment, gasping at the temperature. "Good heavens, it's freezing in here. Where's your heat?" "Broken," Callista said, her legs suddenly refusing to support her. She sagged against the doorframe, and Pastor Williams stepped forward quickly to catch her. "Let's get you back to bed," he said, supporting her weight with surprising strength for a man in his 60s. "Eleanor, can you get that soup warming?" What followed was a blur for Callista. She was helped back to bed, where Ashwin and Leela made room for her, watching the proceedings with cautious interest. Eleanor bustled in the kitchen, producing chicken soup from the thermos and forcing Callista to sip it slowly. Pastor Williams set up 2 additional space heaters, plugging them into separate outlets to avoid overloading the old wiring. "You need a doctor," Eleanor declared after feeling Callista's forehead. "This fever is too high and that cough sounds dangerous." "No insurance," Callista murmured, the admission painful. It was one of the many sacrifices she'd made to afford rent and tuition. "Can't afford urgent care." Eleanor and Pastor Williams exchanged glances, laden with understanding and determination. "Dr. Patel at the community clinic opens at 8 tomorrow, the pastor said. "I'll pick you up, no arguments." As warmth gradually returned to the apartment, Callista felt tears stinging her eyes, not from fever or pain, but from the unexpected kindness. She had been handling everything alone for so long, believing it was the only way, that asking for help was an admission of failure. Now, watching these near strangers rearrange her pillows and organize her medication, she recognized the flaw in that thinking. "Why?" she asked, the question barely audible. Eleanor understood immediately. "Because that's what community means, dear. Not just living in the same town, but carrying each other when the load gets too heavy." She smoothed Callista's tangled hair with a gentle hand. "You've been carrying quite a load, haven't you? Those cats, your studies, all those extra shifts. It's time to let someone else help for a while." The simple permission to accept help broke something inside Callista. Tears flowed freely now, years of independent struggle culminating in this moment of surrender. Ashwin padded up the bed to press his silver head against her cheek, while Leela maintained a protective posture at her feet. "It's okay," Pastor Williams said, his voice a reassuring rumble. "Everyone needs help sometimes, even the strongest among us." As the fever finally broke in the early hours of morning, Callista drifted into peaceful sleep, surrounded by the warmth of cats and the evidence of human kindness. Outside, the winter wind continued its relentless assault on Millfield, but inside this small apartment, spring had begun to take root in unexpected soil. January brought a brief thaw to Millfield, melting the crusted snow into rivulets that flowed along curbs and dripped from eaves. The temporary respite from winter's grip mirrored Callista's gradual recovery from pneumonia, which had been Dr. Patel's somber diagnosis at the community clinic. "You're fortunate your friends brought you in when they did," the doctor had said, her dark eyes serious behind wire-rimmed glasses. "Another day or two, and you might have required hospitalization." The subsequent weeks had been a revelation for Callista. Forced to reduce her hours at the cafe while recovering, she had reluctantly accepted help from the community network that had coalesced around her. Eleanor organized a rotation of visitors who brought meals, checked the heat, and even assisted with cat care. Pastor Williams arranged for emergency heating assistance to cover the exorbitant bills that had accumulated during the coldest weeks. Frank held her job, assigning her lighter duties when she did return, and occasionally slipping extra food into her bag at the end of shifts. "You've built quite a support system," Dr. Patel observed during Callista's follow-up appointment. "For someone who's only lived here 2 years, that's impressive." Callista smiled, still unaccustomed to the idea that people cared about her welfare. "It surprised me too. I've always handled things alone." "Independence is admirable," the doctor said, making notes in Callista's chart. "But it's not the same as isolation. Humans are social creatures. We need connections to thrive, just like we need air and water." The truth of this observation was evident in Callista's improving health. The persistent cough had finally subsided, her appetite had returned, and color had replaced the pallor in her cheeks. Even her sleep had deepened, no longer disrupted by financial anxiety or physical discomfort. Ashwin and Leela had been constant companions throughout her illness, maintaining their vigil even after human visitors departed. Their presence offered a different kind of healing, the comfort of unconditional acceptance, of love that asked nothing but presence in return. They seemed to understand her vulnerability, moderating their play when she needed rest, and curling close when chills set in. As January progressed, life settled into a new rhythm. Callista returned to part-time shifts at the cafe, where regular customers welcomed her back with genuine concern about her health. She resumed classes, discovering that professors had been surprisingly accommodating during her absence. Even Mrs. Holden showed unexpected consideration, arranging for permanent repairs to the building's heating system without increasing rent, a minor miracle in Millfield's tight housing market. "You look better," the landlady commented one afternoon, encountering Callista in the building's entryway. "Less," she waved a hand vaguely, searching for the word. "Less like death warmed over?" Callista suggested with a smile. Mrs. Holden's lips twitched in what might have been amusement. "Precisely, and the cats, are they well?" The simple inquiry, delivered in Mrs. Holden's usual clipped tone, represented a significant shift in their relationship. From reluctant tolerance to genuine interest, it was a small step perhaps, but meaningful. "They're wonderful," Callista replied. "Leela has started playing again, chasing balls and ribbon, and Ashwin follows her everywhere, like he's afraid she'll disappear if he looks away." Something softened in Mrs. Holden's stern expression. "Animals remember," she said quietly. "My Harold always said they feel things more purely than humans do, without all our complications." The mention of her late husband, offered voluntarily, without the usual protective barrier of formality, was not lost on Callista. "I think he was right," she said simply. Mrs. Holden nodded, then straightened, resuming her customary demeanor. "Well, I'm glad you're recovered. The hallway looks better with regular vacuuming." It was as close to warmth as the landlady was likely to express, and Callista accepted it with a smile. "Thank you, Mrs. Holden, for everything." The brief exchange lingered in Callista's thoughts as she climbed the stairs to her apartment. Something fundamental had shifted during her illness, not just in her physical health, but in her relationship with Millfield and its people. Connections that had been tenuous were solidifying, creating a web of support she'd never experienced before. Inside the apartment, Ashwin and Leela greeted her with their usual enthusiasm, weaving between her legs as she set down her backpack and groceries. The space felt different now, warmer, not just from the repaired heating system, but from the accumulated evidence of community care. A quilt from Eleanor draped the couch, bright with patchwork colors. A stack of books from Pastor William's personal library occupied a corner of the coffee table. A handmade cat toy from one of the cafe regulars lay on the floor, well used but still intact. These physical objects represented something Callista had been missing for longer than she cared to admit. Belonging, not just occupying space in a town, but being woven into its fabric, connected to its people through reciprocal bonds of care and concern. As February approached, bringing hints of longer days beneath the persistent cloud cover, Millfield began preparing for its annual Valentine's Festival, a community tradition that transformed the town square into a celebration of connections, both romantic and platonic. Red and pink decorations appeared in shop windows, and posters announced the schedule of events. A pancake breakfast at the fire station, craft activities for children at the library, an evening dance at the community center. "You should come," Eleanor urged during her regular morning visit to the cafe. "The whole town turns out. It's quite charming, especially the lantern release at dusk." Callista hesitated, pouring Eleanor's tea with practiced precision. "I'm not sure. Crowds aren't really my thing." "Nonsense," Eleanor declared, stirring honey into her cup. "You've become quite sociable since your illness. Besides, Martha Wilson specifically asked if you'd be attending. I think she wants to introduce you to her nephew, the one who's studying veterinary medicine at State." The suggestion of matchmaking made Callista flush. "I'm not looking for—" "Of course you're not," Eleanor interrupted with a knowing smile. "Nobody's ever looking when they find what matters. They're just living their lives, and then—" She snapped her fingers. There it is, right in front of them. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of more customers, saving Callista from formulating a response. But as she moved between tables, taking orders and delivering food, she found herself considering the invitation. Perhaps it was time to embrace Millfield fully, not just accepting help when crisis demanded it, but actively participating in the community's celebrations and traditions. That evening, as she sat on the couch with textbooks spread around her and cats curled at her feet, Callista made a decision. She would attend the Valentine's Festival, not with expectations of romance or life-changing encounters, but simply as a resident of Millfield, claiming her place in the community that had embraced her when she needed it most. The choice felt significant, a deliberate step away from the solitary path she'd been walking since childhood. Growing up in foster care had taught Callista to be self-reliant, to expect little, and protect herself from disappointment by keeping expectations low and connections superficial. Even her move to Millfield had been strategic rather than emotional. Affordable housing, proximity to community college, employment opportunities. But Ashwin had changed that calculation with his plaintive paw through shelter bars. And Leela had reinforced the lesson with her quiet dignity in the face of loss. Together, they had shown Callista that some connections were worth risk, worth sacrifice, worth the vulnerability that comes with caring deeply. As if sensing her thoughts, Ashwin stretched and climbed into her lap, disrupting her study notes but offering purring comfort in exchange. Leela followed more sedately, settling against Callista's side with dignified affection. "What do you think?" Callista asked them, scratching behind Ashwin's ears. "Ready to be part of this town for real?" Their synchronized purring seemed answer enough. Some journeys were meant to be shared, with four-legged companions, with neighbors and friends, with a community that understood that the strongest weren't those who never needed help, but those brave enough to accept it when offered. Outside, the temperature dropped as night deepened, promising a return to winter's full grip by morning. But inside this small apartment, with its evidence of care and connection, spring didn't seem so far away after all. The day of the Valentine's Festival dawned clear and cold, with sunlight reflecting blindingly off fresh snow that had fallen overnight. Millfield's town square had been transformed into a winter wonderland, with twinkling lights strung between lampposts and red heart decorations brightening storefronts. Vendors set up tables offering hot chocolate, apple cider, and heart-shaped cookies, their breath forming clouds in the crisp air as they called greetings to early arrivals. Callista observed the activity from the cafe windows, where she was working the morning shift. Despite the early hour, customers flowed steadily through the door, stamping snow from boots and unwinding scarves to reveal flushed, excited faces. "Busiest Valentine's Festival in years," Frank commented, as he restocked paper cups behind the counter. Weather forecast probably helped, clear skies all day. Last year it snowed so hard they had to cancel the lantern release. It looks wonderful, Callista said, watching children in colorful winter gear dash across the square, their laughter carrying through the frosty air. Frank studied her with shrewd eyes. You going? After your shift? Callista nodded. Eleanor convinced me, said I should experience a proper Millfield tradition. Smart woman, Eleanor. Frank handed her a tray of fresh-baked muffins to arrange in the display case. Town's got a way of growing on people once they let it. The observation struck Callista as profoundly true. Millfield had indeed grown on her, putting down roots in her heart when she wasn't looking. What had once been merely a place to live had become home, with all the complexity and comfort that word implied. Her shift ended at noon, giving her time to return to the apartment and change before the festival's afternoon activities began. Ashwin and Leela greeted her with their usual enthusiasm, weaving figure eights around her ankles as she shed her work clothes and considered her limited wardrobe options. She settled on her best jeans and a deep green sweater Eleanor had given her for Christmas, accessorized with a cream-colored scarf. The outfit wasn't fancy, but it represented her best effort at festive attire. After a moment's hesitation, she applied a touch of mascara and lip gloss, small concessions to the special occasion. Wish me luck, she told the cats, who watched her preparations with feline curiosity. First community event as a real Millfield resident. The walk to the town square filled Callista with unexpected anticipation. The streets were alive with people heading to the festival, families with children, elderly couples walking arm in arm, groups of teenagers throwing snowballs despite admonishments from parents. The atmosphere was infectious, a shared excitement that transcended age and circumstance. The square itself was even more impressive up close. The old gazebo at its center had been decorated with thousands of tiny lights and paper hearts, creating a fairy tale effect against the winter backdrop. Music played from speakers mounted on light poles, not the expected romantic ballads, but upbeat classics that had people dancing in place as they waited in line for hot beverages. Callista, over here! Eleanor waved from a bench near the gazebo, her small figure bundled in a red coat with a white beret perched on her silver hair. Beside her sat Pastor Williams and a woman Callista recognized as Martha Wilson, the church's event coordinator. We saved you a spot, Eleanor said, patting the bench. Best view for the children's choir performance at 1 o'clock. Callista joined them, accepting a cup of hot chocolate from Pastor Williams with grateful hands. The warmth seeped through her gloves, a welcome contrast to the cold air nipping at her cheeks. I'm so glad you came, Martha said, her round face alight with genuine pleasure. Eleanor's told us so much about you and your cats. Such a wonderful story, reuniting mother and baby like that. Callista blushed, unaccustomed to being the subject of conversation. It was the right thing to do, she said simply. The right thing is rarely the easy thing, Pastor Williams observed. That's what makes it meaningful. The children's choir performance began before Callista could respond, filling the square with young voices singing traditional love songs with endearing enthusiasm, if not perfect pitch. The audience applauded each number with heartfelt appreciation, parents filming on phones and grandparents wiping surreptitious tears. As the afternoon progressed, Callista found herself drawn into the festival's activities with increasing ease. She helped children decorate paper lanterns at the craft table, participated in a community snowman building contest. Their team's creation featured a coffee cup and apron in her honor, and even joined a group sing-along led by the high school music teacher. Throughout it all, she was continually surprised by how many people knew her name, asked about her health since the pneumonia, or inquired after Ashwin and Leela. The cats had become minor celebrities in Millfield, their stories spreading through the community grapevine, with embellishments that made Callista smile. Is it true you carried the mother cat through a blizzard? Asked a wide-eyed girl at the lantern-making table. Not exactly a blizzard, Callista corrected gently, but it was snowing pretty hard, and they recognized each other right away, the child persisted. Even though they'd been apart? Immediately, Callista confirmed, helping the girl attach a string to her completed lantern. Some bonds can't be broken, even by time or distance. The simple truth of this statement resonated beyond the context of cats, touching something deeper in Callista's understanding of connection and belonging. Some bonds were indeed unbreakable, not just between mother and child, but between people who chose to care for one another, to show up when needed, to offer help without expectation of return. As dusk approached, the festival's focus shifted to the much-anticipated lantern release. Hundreds of paper lanterns, decorated throughout the day by festival attendees, were distributed along with small battery-operated lights to place inside them. The gathering crowd moved toward the park adjacent to the town square, where the open space would allow the lanterns to rise safely into the darkening sky. "There you are!" Eleanor appeared at Callista's elbow, accompanied by a tall young man with glasses and a friendly smile. "I've been looking everywhere. Callista, this is Robert Wilson, Martha's nephew. Robert, this is Callista, the young woman I told you about." "The cat rescuer," Robert said, extending a gloved hand. "My aunts shared the story with the entire extended family. It's nice to finally meet you." Callista shook his hand, feeling unexpectedly self-conscious. "Eleanor exaggerates. I just did what anyone would do." "Not anyone," Robert replied. His voice was warm, his eyes kind behind the glasses. "Most people talk themselves out of the inconvenient right thing. Takes courage to move toward difficulty instead of away from it." There was something genuine in his assessment that diffused Callista's embarrassment. This wasn't empty flattery, but a thoughtful observation from someone who valued substance over appearance. Eleanor beamed at them both. "Robert's studying veterinary medicine," she said, as though this information wasn't transparently part of her matchmaking strategy. "He works weekends at the animal clinic in Hartsville." "That must be fascinating," Callista said, genuinely interested despite her awareness of Eleanor's machinations. "What made you choose veterinary medicine?" As Robert described his childhood experiences, rescuing injured wildlife on his family's farm, Callista found herself drawn into conversation that flowed with surprising ease. Unlike the awkward small talk she usually endured at social gatherings, this exchange felt natural, guided by shared interests and mutual curiosity. They were still talking when Mayor Thompson took the microphone at the park's center, calling for attention. As darkness settled fully over Millfield, the crowd quieted, hundreds of faces illuminated by the gentle glow of lantern lights. "Welcome, friends and neighbors, to our annual Valentine's Lantern release," the mayor announced, his voice carrying across the hushed gathering. "This tradition reminds us that love, in all its forms, brings light to our darkest seasons. Each lantern represents the connections that sustain us, family bonds, friendships, romantic partnerships, and the broader ties of community that make Millfield not just a place on the map, but a home for all who live here." The words resonated deeply with Callista, articulating the transformation she'd experienced since Ashwin first reached his paw through those shelter bars. From isolation to connection, from mere survival to belonging, it had been a journey as profound as any physical relocation. "On the count of 3, Mayor Thompson continued, "we'll release our lanterns together, carrying our hopes and gratitude into the night sky. 1, 2, 3. Hundreds of lanterns rose simultaneously, creating a breathtaking spectacle of ascending lights against the velvet darkness. The crowd gasped collectively as the glowing paper vessels drifted upward, carried on gentle currents of air, forming constellations more personal and immediate than the stars they temporarily obscured. Callista's lantern, decorated with silver and dark grey cats among red hearts, floated among them, a small testament to the love that had transformed her life. As she watched it rise, she felt Robert's presence beside her, a comfortable warmth in the February chill. "Beautiful," he murmured, his gaze following the ascending lights. "Yes," Callista agreed, but she wasn't only looking at the lanterns. Her perspective had widened to include the entire gathering, families with arms around each other, elderly couples holding hands, friends with heads tilted together, all united in this moment of collective wonder. This too was beautiful, perhaps even more so than the spectacle above. The lanterns continued their journey, growing smaller as they rose higher, until they were indistinguishable from stars. Gradually, the crowd began to disperse, moving toward the community center, where the evening dance would soon begin. "Will you stay for the dance?" Robert asked, his question casual, but his eyes revealing genuine interest. Callista hesitated. She had planned to return home after the lantern release, back to the comfortable certainty of cats and textbooks. The dance represented another step into community involvement, another opportunity for connection, and with it, the vulnerability that always accompanied opening oneself to others. Eleanor, who had been pretending not to eavesdrop, interjected before Callista could respond. "Of course she's staying. I've been telling her about the Valentine's dance for weeks. Haven't I, dear?" Callista laughed, recognizing Eleanor's transparent matchmaking, but finding herself unable to resent it. You might have mentioned it once or twice. Then it's settled, Eleanor declared with satisfaction. Robert, be a gentleman and escort us both. These old bones need a steady arm on icy paths. The community center's main hall had been transformed with the same festive decorations that adorned the town square. Red and pink streamers hung from the ceiling, heart-shaped balloons clustered in corners, and tables along the perimeter offered refreshments and places to rest between dances. A local band, comprised of a music teacher on piano, the hardware store owner on guitar, and several high school students on various instruments, played a mix of classic love songs and contemporary hits. The three-generation spread of attendees created an atmosphere unlike any dance Callista had experienced before. Young children twirled unself-consciously beside teenage couples, maintaining careful distances under parental supervision. Elderly couples demonstrated dance moves from their youth, while middle-aged parents enjoyed rare moments of leisure between family responsibilities. "This is not what I expected," Callista admitted to Robert as they found seats at a table near the refreshments. "Millfield events never are," he replied with a smile. "That's their charm. No pretension, no separation by age or status, just people enjoying each other's company." Eleanor had already been whisked away by Pastor Williams for a surprisingly energetic foxtrot, her silver head bobbing among the dancers as she called directions to her less coordinated partner. "She's remarkable," Robert observed, watching Eleanor with obvious affection. 83 years old, and still the liveliest person in most rooms. "She's been so kind to me," Callista said, "especially during my illness. I don't know what I would have done without her checking on me, bringing soup, making sure the cats were okay." "That's Eleanor. Been doing the same for half the town since her Harold passed. Says it keeps her young." Robert turned his attention back to Callista. "She thinks highly of you, you know. Says you remind her of herself at your age. Determined, independent, with a soft spot for strays." The comparison to Eleanor, whom Callista had come to admire deeply, felt like a significant compliment. "I hope I have half her energy and compassion when I'm her age. Based on what I've heard about your rescue efforts, you're well on your way." Robert's tone was warm with genuine admiration. 2 security deposits, extra work for your landlady, double the cat expenses, all while working and studying. That's not a small commitment. "It was necessary," Callista said simply. "You should have seen Ashwin before the reunion. He cried every night looking for his mother. And Leela was fading away at the shelter. They needed each other. And they needed you," Robert added. "Someone who could see what mattered beyond practicality or convenience." The conversation flowed easily from there, touching on Robert's veterinary studies, Callista's psychology courses, their shared love of animals, and the quirks of small-town life. When the band shifted to a slow waltz, Robert hesitated, then extended his hand. "Would you like to dance? I'm not particularly graceful, but I promise not to step on your toes more than twice." The self-deprecating humor made Callista smile. "I can't guarantee the same," she warned, taking his hand. Dancing wasn't part of the foster care curriculum. If Robert was surprised by this casual reference to her background, he didn't show it. Instead, he led her gently to the dance floor, where couples of all ages swayed to the music. His hand at her waist was respectful, his movements careful but not tentative. "You mentioned foster care," he said as they found their rhythm. "Was that here in Millfield?" Callista shook her head. "I grew up all over. 6 different homes between 8 and 18. Millfield is the first place I've chosen for myself." "That can't have been easy," Robert said, his tone free of pity but filled with understanding. "Moving so often, adapting to new families and rules." "It taught me to be self-reliant," Callista replied. The admission felt significant. She rarely discussed her background, preferring to focus on the present. Yet something about Robert's attentive listening invited honesty. "Maybe too self-reliant. It took pneumonia and 2 persistent cats to make me accept help from others." "Self-reliance is a survival skill," Robert observed. "But community is what makes life worth living." The simple truth of this statement resonated deeply with Callista. Her journey from isolation to connection had indeed transformed mere survival into something richer, more meaningful. Ashwin and Leela had been the catalyst, but the transformation had expanded far beyond her relationship with them. "Yes," she agreed softly. "I'm beginning to understand that." The dance continued, and Callista found herself relaxing into the moment. The gentle sway of movement, the warmth of human connection, the sense of belonging to something larger than herself. Around them, Millfield residents of all ages shared similar moments of connection, creating a tapestry of community that stretched across generations. When the music ended, Robert led her back to their table where Eleanor had returned, fanning herself dramatically after her exertions on the dance floor. "My goodness, Pastor Williams has 2 left feet, and neither knows where it's going," she declared, accepting a cup of punch from Robert with grateful hands. "But it was delightful nonetheless. How was your dance, dears?" "Pleasant," Callista said, unable to suppress a smile at Eleanor's transparent interest. "Just pleasant?" Eleanor raised an eyebrow. "Young people these days so restrained in their descriptions. In my day, a good dance with a handsome partner would have been magical at minimum." Robert laughed, the sound warm and genuine. "Eleanor, your matchmaking lacks subtlety but makes up for it in enthusiasm." "Who said anything about matchmaking?" Eleanor replied with feigned innocence. "Can't an old woman simply want 2 of her favorite young people to enjoy each other's company?" The evening continued with more dancing, conversation, and laughter. Callista found herself drawn into the community celebration with unexpected ease, her usual reserve melting in the warmth of acceptance she felt from all sides. Mayor Thompson chatted with her about the shelter's ongoing needs. Martha Wilson shared family recipes she promised to write down, and even Mrs. Halden, who made a brief appearance, acknowledged her with a nod that bordered on friendly. As the clock approached 10, the band announced their final number, a gentle ballad that brought couples of all ages to the floor for one last dance. Robert turned to Callista with a questioning glance and she nodded, rising to join him. This time their movements felt more synchronized, more comfortable, as though they'd crossed some invisible barrier from strangers to something approaching friendship. In the soft lighting, with music wrapping around them, Callista experienced a sense of possibility that had been absent from her carefully controlled life for too long. "I'd like to meet them," Robert said suddenly. "Ashwin and Leela. If that's okay with you." The request, simple and direct, carried weight beyond its words. This was an invitation to extend their connection beyond the festival, to bring this new potential friendship into her everyday life. "They'd like that," Callista replied, surprising herself with the certainty in her voice. "They're good judges of character." "High praise," Robert said with a smile. "I'll try to live up to their standards." As the final notes of the song faded, Callista felt a curious mix of emotions, contentment with the evening's unexpected pleasures, anticipation of possibilities to come, and a quiet wonder at how far she had traveled from the solitary young woman who had once entered Millfield Animal Shelter simply to drop off donations. The walk home through quiet, snow-covered streets gave Callista time to reflect on the day's events. Eleanor had insisted on a taxi despite the short distance, but Callista had preferred the clarity of cold air and the peaceful solitude after hours of social interaction. Robert had understood, offering instead to call tomorrow about visiting the cats, a courtesy that respected her need for space while maintaining the connection they'd established. Millfield slept around her, windows glowing with warm light behind curtains, occasional laughter or music drifting from homes where Valentine's celebrations continued in private. The snow crunched beneath her boots, and her breath formed clouds in the frigid air, but Callista barely noticed the cold. Her thoughts were too full, her heart too warm with the recognition of how much had changed since that October day, when a small grey paw had reached through metal bars to touch her soul. When she arrived home, Ashwin and Leela greeted her with their usual enthusiasm, weaving between her legs as she removed her coat and boots. Their synchronized purring filled the apartment, a familiar comfort after a day of new experiences. "You won't believe the day I've had," she told them, settling on the couch where they immediately joined her, seeking warmth and affection. "And someone special wants to meet you both tomorrow." As she stroked their fur, watching their contented responses, Callista realized that her world had expanded in ways she never could have anticipated when she first brought Ashwin home. What had begun as a simple act of compassion, one young woman unable to ignore the plea in a kitten's eyes, had rippled outward, creating connections and opportunities that continued to unfold. The journey wasn't complete, of course. Challenges remained: financial pressures, academic demands, the ongoing navigation of relationships new and evolving. But the path forward seemed clearer now, illuminated by the lanterns of community and connection that had risen that night above Millfield, carrying hopes and possibilities into the winter sky. Spring arrived in Millfield with characteristic subtlety, not in dramatic bursts of warmth and color, but in gentle increments that required attention to appreciate. The hard-packed snow along sidewalks receded first, revealing matted grass that gradually greened with returning life. Tree branches that had stood stark against winter skies developed the faintest blush of buds, promising leaves to come. Birdsong returned to dawn choruses, tentative at first, then increasingly confident as days lengthened and temperatures moderately rose. For Callista, the seasonal transition mirrored her own ongoing evolution. The Valentine's Festival had marked a turning point, opening doors to deeper community involvement and new relationships that continued to develop as winter reluctantly released its grip on Millfield. Robert's visit to meet Ashwin and Leela had been the first of many. What began as occasional coffee dates expanded to study sessions, his veterinary textbooks alongside her psychology materials, shared meals, and long walks through Millfield's neighborhoods as spring emerged. His gentle humor, genuine interest in her thoughts, and evident affection for her feline family created a comfortable connection unlike any Callista had experienced before. "They've completely accepted you," she observed one evening in early April, watching as Ashwin sprawled across Robert's lap, while Leela maintained her more dignified position beside him on the couch. "It took them weeks to be this comfortable with Eleanor." "Professional advantage," Robert replied with a smile, scratching behind Ashwin's ears, in exactly the spot that elicited maximum purring. "Years of learning cat psychology. Plus, I bribe them with treats when you're not looking." "I suspected as much," Callista laughed, the sound coming easily now where once it had been rare in her apartment. "They're shameless opportunists." "Smart survivors," Robert corrected gently. "They know a good situation when they find it." The observation, simple but perceptive, encompassed more than just the cats. All of them, Ashwin, Leela, Callista, and now Robert, had recognized something worth preserving in their evolving family unit, something that transcended convenience or circumstance to touch deeper needs for connection and belonging. Beyond the walls of her apartment, Callista's connection to Millfield continued to strengthen through ongoing involvement with the shelter. What had begun as emergency assistance during the winter heating crisis had developed into regular volunteer work, with Callista coordinating donations and occasionally helping with weekend adoption events. Her growing expertise with cats, hard-earned through her experiences with Ashwin and Leela, proved valuable in helping potential adopters understand the responsibilities and rewards of pet ownership. Her story of reuniting mother and kitten became something of a shelter legend, shared with visitors as an example of the special bonds between animals and the importance of considering those connections in adoption decisions. "You've got a gift," Marjorie told her during a particularly successful adoption event where Callista had matched 3 long-term shelter residents with appropriate families. "You see beyond the surface to what really matters." The compliment warmed Callista, recognizing as it did a quality she had developed through her journey with Ashwin and Leela. The ability to look past practical concerns to emotional truths, to value connection over convenience. These had become guiding principles in her approach to both animals and people. At the cafe, her role had also evolved. Frank had promoted her to assistant manager, acknowledging both her dedication during difficult times and her growing rapport with regular customers. The position came with a modest raise that eased financial pressures and allowed her to reduce hours slightly to accommodate her volunteer work and studies. "You're good with people," Frank said gruffly when offering the promotion. "They trust you. Important quality in this business." "Thank you," Callista replied, touched by the assessment from a man known for sparse praise. "I've learned from the best." Frank harumphed and turned away, but not before Callista caught the pleased expression that briefly crossed his weathered face. Another connection strengthened, another thread in the tapestry of community she was gradually weaving around herself. Even her relationship with Mrs. Holden had transformed in unexpected ways. The landlady's initial reluctant tolerance of the cats had evolved into something approaching interest, evident in her occasional inquiries about their welfare and the small bag of cat treats Callista once found hanging from her doorknob, with no note, but an unmistakable source. The most profound changes, however, were internal. The defensive self-reliance that had once defined Callista's approach to life, a necessary protection during her years in foster care, had softened into a more balanced independence. She remained capable and self-sufficient, but no longer viewed accepting help or forming attachments as dangerous vulnerabilities. Instead, she recognized them as essential components of a fulfilling life, as natural and necessary as the returning spring after winter's isolation. This transformation was particularly evident on a warm Saturday in May, when Millfield held its annual spring festival in the town park. Unlike the Valentine's celebration, which focused on relationships, the spring festival celebrated renewal and community pride, with activities ranging from tree planting to art displays to performances by local musicians. Callista arrived early, not as a tentative observer, but as an active participant. She had volunteered to help with the animal shelter's booth, where information about adoption would be shared, alongside visits from selected shelter residents deemed calm enough for public interaction. The morning air carried the scent of fresh grass and flowering trees, with hints of cooking food from vendors setting up along the park's perimeter. Volunteers bustled around collapsible tables and canopies, creating an instant village of community organizations and local businesses eager to connect with residents emerging from winter hibernation. "Perfect day for it," Marjorie commented as she helped Callista arrange information pamphlets on the shelter's table. "Last year it rained so hard, we had to move everything into the community center. Not ideal when you're trying to promote outdoor exercise for pets." "The forecast says clear all day," Callista replied, straightening a display of pet care products donated by local businesses for the shelter's fundraising raffle. "Should be a good turnout." Her prediction proved accurate as the morning progressed. Millfield residents of all ages streamed into the park, many greeting Callista by name as they stopped at the shelter's booth to admire the visiting animals. 2 senior cats, a gentle older dog, and a remarkably calm rabbit, all wearing "Adopt Me" bandanas in cheerful spring colors. Eleanor arrived around noon, her silver hair crowned with a floral headband that matched her pastel dress. "You look right at home," she observed, watching Callista confidently answer questions from a young family interested in cat adoption. "Hard to believe you were once so hesitant about community involvement." "I had good teachers," Callista replied with a warm smile. "You, Pastor Williams, Frank, Ashwin and Leela, even Mrs. Holden in her way." Eleanor patted her hand affectionately. "We opened doors, dear. You chose to walk through them." She glanced meaningfully across the park, where Robert was helping set up the veterinary clinic's information booth. "And some choices lead to particularly pleasant paths." Callista followed her gaze, warmth rising in her cheeks at Eleanor's transparent approval of her developing relationship with Robert. "We're taking things slowly," she said, though she couldn't suppress the smile that accompanied the words. "As you should," Eleanor agreed. "The best gardens grow gradually, with proper attention to roots before flowers appear." The horticultural metaphor was typical of Eleanor, who expressed much of her wisdom through references to her beloved garden. The festival continued through the afternoon, with Callista dividing her time between the shelter booth and experiencing other activities. She participated in a community art project, planting a tree seedling with a group of elementary school children, and enjoying musical performances from local artists. Throughout it all, she moved with a confidence and ease that would have been unimaginable months earlier, greeting neighbors, engaging in conversations, offering assistance where needed. As the day began to wane, with golden afternoon light slanting across the park and families beginning to gather their belongings, Mayor Thompson took the central stage for closing remarks. His voice carried across the gathered crowd, most now seated on blankets or portable chairs, with the comfortable exhaustion that follows a day of pleasant activity. "Before we conclude our spring festival," the mayor announced, "we have a special recognition to present. Each year, the Millfield Community Council acknowledges individuals whose contributions embody the spirit of our town: compassion, perseverance, and commitment to the welfare of all our residents, both two-legged and four-legged." A ripple of anticipation moved through the audience. These recognitions were a cherished tradition, highlighting often unsung heroes whose quiet work strengthened the community fabric. "This year's recipient," Mayor Thompson continued, "demonstrated extraordinary compassion during our difficult winter. When faced with a choice between personal convenience and doing what was right, she chose the more challenging but infinitely more rewarding path. Her decision to reunite a mother cat and her kitten, despite financial and logistical obstacles, inspired many of us to reconsider our own capacity for meaningful action." Callista felt heat rising in her cheeks as realization dawned. Surely they weren't recognizing her. Her actions had been private, personal, not the kind of community service usually acknowledged at such events. "Furthermore," the mayor went on, "her subsequent involvement with our animal shelter has helped numerous animals find loving homes, while her courage during serious illness showed us all the importance of community support during difficult times. It is my pleasure to present this year's Compassionate Community Member Award to Callista Jenkins. The applause that erupted around her seemed to come from everywhere at once. Eleanor was beaming beside her, clearly unsurprised by the announcement. Across the park, Robert applauded with evident pride, while Frank, standing near the food vendors, offered a rare, full smile. Even Mrs. Holden, seated primly on a folding chair near the stage, joined the applause with measured dignity. "Go on," Eleanor urged, giving her a gentle push toward the stage. "They're waiting for you." Moving through the crowd, accepting congratulatory pats and smiles, Callista felt a curious mixture of embarrassment and profound gratitude. She had never sought recognition for her actions with Ashwin and Leela, had in fact often questioned her own wisdom in taking on such responsibility. To have those choices publicly affirmed, to be seen and appreciated for decisions made from the heart rather than practical calculation, was unexpectedly moving. Mayor Thompson handed her a simple plaque and a small envelope, which he explained contained a gift certificate to the local pet supply store. "A small token of appreciation," he said, "for a large impact on our community." The microphone stood before her, and the expectant faces of Millfield residents waited for a response. Public speaking had never been Callista's strength, and for a moment, panic threatened to overwhelm her. Then she spotted Robert in the crowd, his encouraging nod reminding her that she was not alone, not anymore. "Thank you," she began, her voice steadier than she expected. "This is unexpected. When I adopted Ashwin last fall, I wasn't thinking about community impact or inspiring others. I just couldn't walk away from a kitten who needed me." She paused, gathering thoughts that suddenly seemed important to express correctly. "What I've learned since then, through reuniting him with his mother, through my own illness, through all the support I've received from this community, is that the connections we make are what sustain us. Not just human connections, though those are precious, but the bonds between all living beings who share this space." The words flowed more easily now, rising from a place of authentic experience rather than prepared remarks. "Ashwin and Leela taught me that some bonds cannot and should not be broken, that what seems practical or efficient isn't always what's right. And all of you," her gaze swept across familiar faces, people who had moved from strangers to neighbors to friends, "taught me that accepting help doesn't diminish independence, it enriches it." The applause that followed her simple speech carried a warmth that had nothing to do with the spring sunshine, and everything to do with shared recognition of essential truths. As Callista returned to her seat, accepting hugs and handshakes along the way, she felt a sense of completion, not of her journey, which continued to unfold in ways she couldn't predict, but of a circle that had begun with a small grey paw reaching through shelter bars and now encompassed an entire community. The festival concluded as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the park and painting the sky in watercolor hues of pink and gold. Volunteers dismantled booths and packed away supplies, while families gathered blankets and collected tired children. The day's energy gradually dissipated, leaving behind the satisfied exhaustion that follows meaningful celebration. Robert found Callista as she finished helping Marjorie load the shelter's display materials into a volunteer's van. "Congratulations," he said, his genuine pleasure in her recognition evident in his warm smile. "Well deserved, thank you," Callista replied, still slightly embarrassed by the public acknowledgement, but deeply touched nonetheless. "I still can't believe they chose me. There are people who've been volunteering for years." "It's not about quantity of time," Robert interrupted gently. "It's about quality of impact. Your story resonated because it wasn't about grand gestures or exceptional resources. It was about ordinary courage in everyday decisions, the kind any of us might face but not all would choose. His understanding of what truly mattered, his ability to see beyond surface considerations to deeper truths, was one of the qualities Callista had come to value most about Robert. In many ways, he approached human connections with the same thoughtful attention she gave to animal welfare, seeing not just present circumstances, but histories, needs, and possibilities. "I was thinking," he said as they began walking toward the park exit, the plaque tucked carefully under Callista's arm, "we should celebrate. Nothing elaborate, maybe dinner at my place. I make a pretty decent pasta primavera, and I happen to know 2 cats who might enjoy an evening with company." The invitation, casual but meaningful, represented another step in their evolving relationship. Another door opening to possibilities that once would have terrified Callista, but now felt like natural progression. "That sounds perfect," she agreed, her smile reflecting the contentment that had gradually replaced anxiety as her default response to life's offerings. Ashwin and Leela would love it. As they walked through streets now painted with the golden light of approaching sunset, Callista reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. From the solitary young woman who had entered Millfield Animal Shelter on an October day to drop off donations, to the community member now recognized for compassion and connection, the transformation seemed both remarkable and inevitable, a natural unfolding of possibilities that had always existed, but required the right catalyst to emerge. That catalyst had been a small grey paw reaching through metal bars, a simple gesture of connection that had changed everything. Ashwin's silent plea, "Don't leave me alone too," had touched something in Callista that recognized itself in his vulnerability, his need for belonging. In saving him, in reuniting him with Leela, she had also saved something in herself, the capacity for connection that foster care and self-protection had buried but never extinguished. When they reached her apartment building, Robert paused at the entrance. 7 o'clock, he suggested. "I'll pick you up, save you the walk." 7 is perfect, Callista agreed. The momentary awkwardness of parting, not quite a date, but more than casual friendship, resolved itself when Robert leaned forward and placed a gentle kiss on her cheek. "I'm proud of you," he said simply. "See you tonight." As she climbed the stairs to her apartment, Callista carried the warmth of those words with her, another thread in the tapestry of connection that now enriched her life. Inside, Ashwin and Leela greeted her with their usual enthusiasm, weaving around her ankles and purring their welcome. "You'll never guess what happened today," she told them, setting down the plaque on her coffee table and kneeling to stroke their fur. "And we have dinner plans tonight." Their synchronized purring seemed to approve of these developments, their contentment a reflection of the home they had created together, not just a physical space, but an emotional sanctuary where all of them had found what they most needed. Outside, spring continued its patient work of renewal, coaxing life from soil that had seemed barren under winter's grip. Inside, a similar renewal had taken root in Callista's heart, growing steadily toward a future rich with possibilities she was only beginning to imagine. The circle that had begun with separation, a mother cat from her kitten, a young woman from meaningful connection, had completed itself in reunion and expansion. What had once been broken had been made whole, and in the healing, something new and beautiful had emerged. As evening settled over Millfield, wrapping the town in soft twilight, Callista sat with her cats on the windowsill, watching stars appear in the deepening sky. Each pinpoint of light seemed to represent a connection made, a possibility recognized, a door opened rather than closed. "We did it," she whispered to Ashwin and Leela, who blinked contentedly in the gathering darkness. "We found our way home," and in the quiet of that moment, with purring cats and the promise of tomorrow's continued journey, Callista knew with absolute certainty that they had indeed accomplished the most important task any living being faces. They had found where they belonged. 1 year later, the Millfield Animal Shelter looked very different from the cold, under-resourced facility where Ashwin and Leela had once been separated. Fresh paint brightened the walls, new heating and cooling systems maintained comfortable temperatures year-round, and each enclosure contained comfortable bedding, toys, and appropriate enrichment activities. Most significantly, a new policy ensured that bonded animals, whether parent and offspring, siblings, or long-term companions, remained together during their stay and were adopted as a unit whenever possible. These changes hadn't happened overnight or without effort. They represented months of fundraising, advocacy, and community education, led by a committee that had formed during the previous winter's heating crisis. Callista served as the committee's chair, bringing first-hand experience and passionate conviction to the role, while Robert provided veterinary expertise and Eleanor contributed organizational wisdom gleaned from decades of community involvement. On this particular spring morning, sunlight streamed through newly installed windows as Callista conducted a tour for potential donors, representatives from a regional foundation interested in supporting animal welfare initiatives in smaller communities. "As you can see," she explained, leading the visitors through renovated kennel areas, "our focus is on creating an environment that minimizes stress while maximizing adoption potential. The physical improvements are important, But equally significant are our policy changes regarding bonded animals. She paused beside a spacious enclosure where an elderly cat groomed a younger one with motherly attention. Research consistently shows that animals who maintain their important relationships experience less anxiety, exhibit fewer behavior problems, and adapt more successfully to new homes. Our adoption rates have increased 30% since implementing these changes, and return rates have dropped significantly. The Foundation representatives nodded appreciatively, making notes as Callista continued the tour. Her confidence in this setting, articulating complex issues, answering technical questions, advocating for further improvements, reflected her growth over the past year. The nervous young woman who had once been overwhelmed by a kitten's pleading gaze had evolved into a poised community leader whose personal experience informed professional expertise. "And this is our new medical treatment room," she said, opening a door to reveal a small but well-equipped space where a volunteer veterinarian currently examined a recently arrived puppy. Previously, animals requiring more than basic care had to be transported to clinics in larger towns. Now we can provide many treatments on site, reducing stress and improving outcomes. As the tour concluded in the shelter's small office, Callista answered final questions about budgets, volunteer training, and long-term sustainability plans. The Foundation representative seemed impressed, exchanging glances that suggested positive discussions would follow. "You've accomplished remarkable improvements in a relatively short time," the senior representative observed as they prepared to leave. "What would you say was the catalyst for this transformation?" Callista considered the question carefully. "I'd say it began with recognition, seeing the real impact of separation on bonded animals, understanding that what seemed efficient from a management perspective was often detrimental from a welfare standpoint. Once we acknowledged that reality, we couldn't continue with business as usual." After the visitors departed, Callista completed paperwork for recent adoptions, her mind drifting occasionally to the evening ahead. Today marked 1 year since the Spring Festival, where she had received the Compassionate Community Member Award, an anniversary Robert had mysteriously insisted on celebrating with a special dinner at his apartment. Their relationship had deepened gradually over the intervening months, building on shared values and complementary strengths. Robert's calm practicality balanced Callista's passionate advocacy, while her emotional insight enriched his scientific approach to animal welfare. Together, they had become a respected team in Millfield's animal care community, collaborating on educational programs, adoption events, and policy improvements. When her shift at the shelter ended, Callista returned home to prepare for the evening. Ashwin and Leela greeted her with their customary enthusiasm, now joined by a third cat, an elderly orange tabby named Nelson, who had been scheduled for euthanasia at a neighboring county's shelter before Callista and Robert intervened. The 3 cats had formed an unlikely but harmonious family unit, with Nelson assuming a grandfatherly role toward the younger pair. "Special night tonight," she told them, as she changed from work clothes into a simple blue dress that Robert had once complimented. "Anniversary dinner at Robert's. Don't wait up." The cats watched her preparations with varying degrees of interest, Ashwin batting playfully at dangling earrings, Leela maintaining dignified observation from the windowsill, and Nelson snoring gently from his favorite cushion on the couch. Their presence in her apartment, their individual personalities and collective harmony, remained a daily reminder of the journey that had transformed Callista's life. When Robert arrived to pick her up, his appreciative smile confirmed she had chosen her outfit well. "You look beautiful," he said, the sincerity in his voice warming her more than elaborate compliments could have. "Thank you," she replied, suddenly feeling a flutter of nervous anticipation that seemed disproportionate to a simple anniversary dinner. "You're looking quite handsome yourself." It was true. Robert had traded his usual casual attire for pressed slacks and a button-down shirt that complemented his tall frame. More telling was the unusual energy that seemed to radiate from him, a combination of excitement and anxiety that matched Callista's own inexplicable nervousness. The spring evening was perfect for walking, with mild temperatures and cherry trees blooming along Millfield's residential streets. As they strolled toward Robert's apartment, their conversation flowed easily between shelter updates, community news, and shared memories of the previous year. "Remember when Mrs. Holden caught Nelson sleeping in her flower box?" Robert asked, laughing at the recollection. "I thought she was going to evict all of you on the spot. Instead, she just installed that little cat bed beside it. Callista recalled, still amazed by her landlady's continuing evolution from stern rule enforcer to reluctant animal enthusiast. Now she leaves treats on the windowsill for him? These small miracles of transformation, Mrs. Haldon's softening, the shelter's improvements, Callista's own growth from isolated survivor to connected community member, created a tapestry of change that continued to unfold in ways both subtle and profound. When they reached Robert's apartment, Callista noticed immediately that something was different. The usual comfortable clutter of veterinary textbooks and research papers had been tidied away, replaced by candles, fresh flowers, and what appeared to be an actual tablecloth on the rarely used dining table. "This looks fancy," she observed, touched by the evident effort. "What's the occasion, besides the award anniversary, I mean?" "Let's just say I wanted tonight to be special," Robert replied with a slightly nervous smile. "Wine before dinner? I have that Riesling you liked at Eleanor's birthday gathering." The meal was indeed special. Robert had prepared not just his signature pasta primavera, but an entire menu featuring Callista's favorite foods, from the crusty artisan bread that began the meal to the homemade apple tart that concluded it. Conversation flowed as easily as the wine, touching on shared memories, future plans for the shelter, and the ongoing evolution of Millfield's animal welfare community. Yet beneath the comfortable familiarity, Callista sensed an undercurrent of anticipation in Robert's manner, a certain watchfulness, as though waiting for the right moment for something as yet unspoken. His hands occasionally strayed to his pocket, a gesture she pretended not to notice as the evening progressed. After dinner, Robert suggested they take their coffee to the small balcony overlooking the town square. Spring had transformed the view, with flowering trees creating a canopy of pink and white blossoms above benches, where Millfield residents gathered to enjoy the mild evening. In the distance, hills that had been barren through winter now wore delicate green, a promise of fuller abundance to come. "It's beautiful," Callista said, leaning against the railing beside Robert. "Hard to believe how different everything looked just a few months ago." "That's the miracle of seasons," Robert replied, his voice thoughtful. "Even when everything seems dormant or lost, life continues beneath the surface, waiting for the right conditions to re-emerge." The observation struck Callista as particularly apt for their shared journey, not just the annual cycle of nature, but the personal transformations that had brought them to this moment. What had appeared dormant in her own capacity for connection had merely been waiting for the right circumstances, the right catalyst, to emerge and flourish. "I've been thinking a lot about that lately," Robert continued, turning to face her directly, "about how things that seem impossible can become not just possible but inevitable, given time and the right conditions." He took her hand, his fingers warm against hers in the cooling evening air. "When I first heard about the crazy cat lady who braved a snowstorm to reunite a mother cat with her kitten—" "Crazy cat lady?" Callista interrupted, raising an eyebrow in mock offense. "Eleanor's words, not mine," Robert clarified with a smile. "Anyway, when I first heard the story, I thought it was just a nice community anecdote. I never imagined meeting you would change everything for me." The earnestness in his voice, the unusual solemnity in his expression, sent a ripple of awareness through Callista. This wasn't just anniversary nostalgia, something more significant was unfolding. "This past year has been the most meaningful of my life," Robert continued. "Watching you transform the shelter, seeing how you've opened yourself to the community while staying true to your values, working alongside you to create real change for animals who can't advocate for themselves. It's shown me what's possible when compassion meets courage." He reached into his pocket and Callista's heart began to race as he withdrew a small velvet box. "I had a whole speech planned," he admitted with a self-deprecating smile, "but now I'm just going to say what matters most." Kneeling before her on the balcony, with Millfield spread out below them like a living tapestry of shared community, Robert opened the box to reveal a ring, not an elaborate diamond but a simple silver band set with a small emerald that caught the evening light. "Callista Jenkins, you've taught me to see what truly matters beneath practical concerns and social conventions. You've shown me that some bonds should never be broken, and that the families we create are as valid and vital as those we're born into. Will you marry me and continue building our unconventional family together?" For a moment, Callista couldn't speak, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what was being offered, not just partnership with this man she had grown to love, but a formal recognition of the family they had already begun to create, with each other and with the animals who had brought them together. "Yes," she finally said, her voice steady despite the tears gathering in her eyes. "So yes, I will." As Robert slipped the ring onto her finger, then rose to embrace her, Callista felt the rightness of this next step in their journey. Like Ashwin finding Leela, like Nelson joining their household, like the shelter evolving into a place of true compassion. This union represented not a dramatic departure, but a natural progression, an acknowledgement of what had already taken root and now deserved the chance to fully flourish. They stayed on the balcony for a long time, watching stars emerge above Millfield, while discussing dreams for their shared future. A small house with space for gardening, and of course, room for their growing feline family. Continued advocacy for animal welfare. Perhaps someday children who would grow up understanding the value of all living beings. When they finally returned to Callista's apartment to share their news with Ashwin, Leela and Nelson, the cats greeted them with typical feline indifference to human milestones, more interested in the lingering scent of dinner on their clothes than in the ring now adorning Callista's finger. "Tough audience," Robert joked as Nelson promptly fell asleep on his lap, while Ashwin and Leela engaged in an impromptu wrestling match, oblivious to the momentous announcement just made. "They already know what matters," Callista replied, watching the comfortable domestic scene with a sense of profound contentment. "We're family. The rest is just details." The news of their engagement spread quickly through Millfield's efficient grapevine, generating congratulations from expected sources like Eleanor, who claimed matchmaking credit, and Pastor Williams, who offered the church for the ceremony, as well as from less anticipated well-wishers like Mrs. Halden, who presented them with a hand-crocheted blanket, and Frank, who gruffly announced that the cafe would cater their reception at cost. Wedding plans developed organically, reflecting the couple's shared values and community connections. The ceremony would be held in the town park where Callista had received her award, with a reception at the community center afterward. Eleanor would serve as Callista's matron of honor, while Robert's brother would be best man. Pastor Williams would officiate, incorporating both traditional elements and contemporary readings about chosen families and compassionate living. "What about the cats?" Eleanor asked during one planning session at Callista's apartment. "Will they participate?" "We considered it," Robert admitted, but decided traumatizing them with formal wear and crowds wasn't very compassionate. "Besides," Callista added, scratching Nelson behind the ears as he dozed on her lap, "they're already part of everything important. They don't need to physically attend to be central to what we're celebrating." This was profoundly true. Without Ashwin's reaching paw, without Leela's patient waiting, without Nelson's unexpected addition to their family, the path that led to this engagement might never have opened. The cats had been catalysts, teachers, and companions throughout a journey that transcended simple pet ownership to touch on life's most essential questions. What creates meaningful connection? What responsibilities do we bear toward those who need us? What families do we choose to create when given the freedom to define belonging on our own terms? As summer bloomed across Millfield, wedding preparations continued alongside Callista and Robert's ongoing work with the shelter and veterinary clinic. Their professional collaboration had deepened their personal connection, creating a partnership that seamlessly integrated shared values with complementary skills. Where Callista brought passion and intuitive understanding of animal behavior, Robert contributed medical knowledge and systematic problem-solving. Together, they were transforming animal welfare practices not just in Millfield, but in surrounding communities that began adopting their methods. The wedding day arrived in early September, when summer's heat had softened into golden warmth and the town park blazed with late-season flowers. Chairs arranged in a semicircle faced a simple arch twined with greenery and white roses, with the town's historic gazebo visible in the background. Millfield residents filled those chairs: cafe regulars, shelter volunteers, library patrons, neighbors, and friends who had become a chosen family for a young woman, once defined by cautious self-reliance. As Callista walked toward the arch on Pastor Williams' arm, a role he had hesitantly requested when learning she had no family to give her away, she felt a profound sense of completion. The path from that October day in the shelter to this September wedding represented more than time passing. It marked a journey from isolation to connection, from survival to thriving, from simply existing in a place to truly belonging within a community. Robert waited beneath the arch, his face reflecting emotions too complex for simple description. Joy, certainly, but also gratitude, wonder, and a steady certainty that affirmed their shared choice. Beside him stood his brother, while Eleanor waited on the opposite side, her silver hair crowned with fresh flowers and her face alight with the satisfaction of seeing hopes fulfilled. The ceremony itself was brief but meaningful, with vows the couple had written themselves that acknowledged both their love for each other and their commitment to the broader family they had created, one that included not just humans, but the animals who had brought them together and would remain central to their shared purpose. "I promise to continue building a home where all beings are valued," Callista vowed, her voice steady despite the emotion tightening her throat. "Where compassion guides our decisions, where difficult right choices are preferred over convenient wrong ones, and where the bonds we choose are honored as sacred. I promise to walk beside you in all seasons," Robert responded, his fingers warm around hers. "To support your courage with practical care, to combine my scientific understanding with your intuitive wisdom, and to remember always that our greatest strength lies in the family we have chosen to create together." When Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife, the applause that erupted from the gathered community carried a warmth that transcended conventional celebration. This union represented not just two individuals joining their lives, but a validation of values that many present had come to share through Callista and Robert's influence: the importance of animal welfare, the power of chosen family, the possibility of community transformation through individual compassionate action. The reception that followed in the community center continued this theme of inclusive celebration. Tables decorated with photographs of shelter animals alongside traditional floral arrangements reminded guests of the couple's ongoing work. A special table near the entrance displayed adoption information for current shelter residents, with Marjorie available to answer questions from interested attendees. Even the wedding cake featured small fondant cats among its decorations, a whimsical acknowledgement of the role these animals had played in bringing the couple together. Frank supervised the cafe's catering with uncharacteristic attention to detail, ensuring that the buffet reflected both Callista and Robert's favorites. Mrs. Holden arrived bearing additional handmade gifts. Her usually stern expression softened into something approaching contentment as she watched the celebration unfold. Mayor Thompson offered a toast celebrating not just the marriage, but the couple's contributions to Millfield's ongoing development as a compassionate community. As evening approached, and the reception continued with dancing and conversation, Callista found a moment of quiet in a corner of the hall. Watching Robert chat with Eleanor and Pastor Williams, seeing the diverse gathering of people who had become meaningful parts of her life, she experienced a sense of wonder at how completely her world had transformed in less than 2 years. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Robert asked, appearing beside her with 2 glasses of champagne. "You looked very philosophical just now." "I was thinking about belonging," Callista replied, accepting the glass with a smile. "About how I spent so many years trying to prove I didn't need anyone, convinced that self-reliance was the only safe option. And now," Robert prompted gently, "now I understand that independence and connection aren't opposites," she said. "They're complementary strengths. Being part of a family, our unconventional multi-species family, hasn't diminished my autonomy. It's enriched it." Robert nodded, his expression reflecting understanding of the journey she described. "That's the paradox, isn't it? We're most fully ourselves when we're connected to others who see and value us completely." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching their community celebrate around them. In a few hours, they would return to Callista's apartment, soon to be vacated for the small house they had purchased on the edge of town, with its fenced yard and sunny windows perfect for catnapping. Ashwin, Leela, and Nelson would greet them with their usual mixture of enthusiasm and feline dignity, unimpressed by the human ceremony but integral to the family it formalized. Tomorrow would bring new challenges in their ongoing work: animals needing rescue, policies requiring revision, education programs to develop and implement. The path ahead would include difficulties alongside joys, setbacks among successes. But they would face it together, strengthened by the network of connection they had built and the values they had chosen to prioritize. As the evening deepened into night, with stars appearing above Millfield and laughter echoing through the community center, Callista leaned against her husband's shoulder, content in the knowledge that what had begun with a small grey paw reaching through shelter bars had blossomed into something far richer and more expansive than she could ever have imagined. Some bonds, once formed, can never truly be broken. Some connections, once recognized, continue to grow and strengthen through all seasons. And some journeys, beginning in the most unexpected places, lead exactly where we need to go. Not to perfect destinations free from challenge, but to belonging that embraces both vulnerability and strength, both independence and interdependence, both giving and receiving. For Callista and Robert, for Ashwin, Leela and Nelson, for the community that had embraced them all, that journey continued with each new day, a shared path of compassion, courage, and the enduring power of chosen family to transform individual lives and gradually the world around them. This cat was separated from his mother at the shelter. But what this young woman did next will break your heart, is a story about the healing power of connection between animals, between humans, and between communities. It reminds us that sometimes the most meaningful actions are not grand gestures, but simple choices to prioritize compassion over convenience, to see beyond immediate circumstances to deeper needs. In a world that often emphasizes independence above all else, Ashwin, Leela, and Callista demonstrate that our greatest strength may lie in the courage to connect, to belong, and to create families defined not by convention, but by love. Their journey reminds us that it's never too late to open ourselves to new possibilities, to allow others into our carefully constructed worlds, and to discover that in doing so, we don't become less ourselves, but more fully who we were meant to be all along.